Hey, everybody, and welcome to this episode 163 of the Thoughtium Navigating Now virtual roundtable series. I am Anthony Ewing, your host, CEO, and co-founder here at Thoughtium, and we are thrilled to be back at the table for episode 163. We want to thank everybody who tuned in to the previous month's episodes when we talked about the future of learning and how to future-proof your learning and development organizations. That was a wonderful perspective series hosted by our very own Mary Monastersky. She really brought a host of guests in to really talk about how we can continue to invest in learning and development in our organizations in ways that maybe we haven't before. And so we invite everybody to check that series out. All of our episodes are at thoughttium.com/live. You can also take a look at the accompanying article and toolkit for this past perspective series at thoughttium.com/perspectives. But we're so thrilled to be back at the table here today with a new guest, a new member of the Thoughtium Navigating Now virtual roundtable series, and one that we've been really, really excited to talk to and introduce to you all. Her name is Kristin Simmons. She is a visual artist. She's a creative entrepreneur, and she's somebody that when you ask her what she does, she has a hard time defining it because she does a lot. And it's all in this realm of creation and creativity. And I think we would all agree with the state of the world today with technology proliferating as quickly as it has been. We oftentimes find ourselves asking ourselves, where is the role of the creative process headed? And what is the role of the creative process in our work as artists, as creators, and as knowledge workers? And so Kristin is going to help us unpack that and explore that topic today. So Kristin, welcome to the table for your first episode of the Navigating Now virtual roundtable series. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So I want to open up with a quote about your work that I read that I just thought, man, if I had quotes like this about me and my work, I would be so much more jazzed. Because it seems like everything that's been written about you and your work is just so, it just pops off the page. And I believe that this was a quote from the HuffPo that you were featured in. It says, "The aesthetic of Simmons' artwork is bold and bright and frankly hard to miss. There's an underlying theme of contamination in her works. Childhood contaminated by exposure, independence contaminated by pleasure." I just think that is such a compelling description of your work. And I would love for you to just offer your perspective on, the result of your artwork being so potentially controversial or eye-opening or as illustrative as HuffPo was trying to make it in their article.
Sure. No, thank you for the question and for citing them. I think where I've always found sources of inspiration and creativity are looking at things that can be two things that can be true at once. This kind of idea of embracing paradox and kind of looking at different places in society where that happens and smirking about it. So I think just like how you can't have good without evil, there's something in the creative realm there in terms of the commercial space I work in where I like to find those contradictions. And I'm not by any means living outside of them or not privy to them. I'm just as much a participant in the culture we live in as most people. But it's kind of just a wry sense of humor and way of looking at things that I feel is the right way to start conversations around, any topic that's controversial, as opposed to coming at it from, a didactic, place where people maybe aren't open to talk about things that are seen as more taboo.
I love that. We like to throw around those terms, controversial and taboo. And I think it's easy to kind of like pin those on, artists' work that might be a little abstract or a little bit atypical. But like, I think your work is more than that. It's been described as combining high and low culture. It's the intersection of childhood innocence with adult cynicism. So it's almost like these intersections that maybe draw you in with something that you're very familiar with, and then jolt you with the reality of life. And tell us a little bit about creating some of that contrast in your
Sure.
artwork, and maybe give an example of a piece of art, whether it's an installation or a screen print or mixed media.
Sure. So I've always liked this kind of overlap Venn diagram of which you can't really clearly draw, of where does childhood end and where does adulthood begin? And that was a question I had
Mm,
a lot, or I got a lot as someone who grew up in New York City, and I could never really answer because it's not an age, it wasn't an age, it wasn't a thing, it wasn't a moment. It's kind of a culmination of different things that overlap. And I think for most of the world today, people are growing up faster and faster because of exposure to technology, new media, ideas, the internet, etc. So that whole idea of, okay, if adults are making things that kids are supposed to play with, that kind of that subliminal advertising message and the fascination of the toys we play with and how they shape us and identify us and the symbols we see when we're younger and how those dictate what we value, it's kind of just interesting because you think, well, adults are creating all these things that at the end of the day, they're just, if they're working in advertising, at least they're just
mm,
trying to get children to become lifelong consumers of something. So what would it look like what would something look like if a child created it or a teenager created it?
mm,
And I kind of like doing things that, of course, you recognize what it is on the surface, but once you start to peel back the layers, there's additional messaging, or maybe messaging that you didn't know was there until I talked to you about it. I always tell people, like, if anyone who's a creative, like, hide secrets in your work, because
yeah.
sometimes it's great. You don't want to give everything away, because then what's the point of having the piece in person and or waking up to it, or looking at something again and again if you can just look online. So one example, because you asked me to give one, was I did a series called Second Amendment, which is made out of toy guns that I
Mm,
dipped in resin and painted. And these were guns that I purchased at dollar toy stores,
mm,
pre Sandy Hook, in Harlem here in New York. And I didn't know what I was going to do with them when I first bought them, but I just saw them in these toy stores and I thought, these look far too realistic. I'm just going to buy a bunch. And I decided to arrange them after painting them on a canvas and have them pointing both left and right, as in almost a way for me to say, I don't know what the answer to gun control in the country is. I just know it's a problem. So I'm not making art
right.
that's trying to say, here's what the answer is. I want to make things that start a discussion, that come from a place of interest and compassion as opposed to anger. So that's a perfect one where people say, wow, those guns look so toy-like. And I can say, well, they
Mm,
actually started out looking far more real. And they might, people often can come to their own conclusion, like, is this pro Second Amendment or is it not? And I like working in that space of ambiguity because
sure.
I think um, it's a little more, I don't know if welcoming is the right word. It's just, yeah, it's just a place where I'm more comfortable because I'm trying to figure it out too. Art's my
Sure.
way of processing, like,
Sure.
the world and how we
Yeah.
live as those people
Yeah.
have their creative outlets.
Yeah. It's a wonderful way to kind of draw people in, and then introduce them to kind of the reality or the truth of a situation. You
Or
know,
not too
or
sometimes.
not. Yeah. No. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think for us, as designers of experiences, we're kind of seeking to do the same thing. And you and I were talking before the show that oftentimes that means, kind of going to the analog. One of the things I really like about a lot of your work is that it is extremely not just visual, but it's tangible. In fact, I see a part of your work behind you. It looks like that's the glamour gumballs, which again, like if I'm looking at it right now, it looks like childhood nostalgia. It's a kind of an iconic childhood symbol. But as you get closer, you see the kind of meaning in the piece. Tell us a little bit about the glamour gumballs.
Sure. So these were done as a large set because I was thinking about, again, I love working with iconography from childhood. I think we all remember
Yeah.
the joy of being a kid and, putting something in a machine and not knowing what you were going to get. And part of it, like almost even more of the pleasure, comes from the not knowing what you're going to get as opposed to the prize, or as opposed to the actual thing itself that comes out. And I was just thinking, well, if we had adult gumball machines, what would they look like? And we kind of do. We have some of these vending machines and systems now, but if we took that to, people are constantly wanting to be delighted and surprised, and that's a huge component of the
Yep.
luxury industry. You have to anticipate a client's needs, or you have to know what they are before the client even knows. So I think there's just something very cyclical about that process of, I'm giving you something and I'm getting something in return. I don't know what I want. You, as the
Mm.
higher person or media, needs to help me figure out what I want, or define how rare something is, depending on what's coming out of a machine, etc. So the ones behind me, these have like dinosaurs, and it was kind of like it's a very subliminal messaging on. There were a lot of news articles about different billionaires trying to buy like fossils and T-Rexes that came from archaeological
Mm.
digs. So just the process of competing for those expensive objects. There's another one behind me that does jam, but the more kind of R-rated ones, I have one that has, Botox vials in it, because at this point, like, yeah, of course, the people, literally people go into to most cosmetic places, and it is kind of like an assembly line. And so I just love creating that visual moment of what would this look like if it was like a vending machine and you could just go and get what you wanted from it.
I love that. I want to talk a little bit about your creative process. How has well, maybe tell us a little bit about your creative process and how has it evolved over the last, let's call it 10 years, as technology has ramped up and become ever more a part of our creative process.
Yeah, it's a great question, and something I reflect on a lot. It's actually, I think, become more disjointed, which isn't a good
Mm.
thing. But I constantly, it's kind I always say right now, like with content, like if you're a visual person, you're already noticing things, or a creative person, you're already noticing things or taking notes, or pre-cell phones, I was ripping out pages of books or magazines and putting them
Mm.
away, not knowing, if something spoke to me but I didn't know why, I would just stash it away somewhere, thinking I'll revisit it at a later point. And a lot of artists and creatives do this. So, but now we're in a culture where you're constantly getting notifications, different screens in your face, different pop-ups, etc. And it's like trying to drink water out of like a fire hydrant instead of a
Yeah.
fountain. That's the only way I can describe it. So I find that I have to be much more intentional now about, okay, I need to develop this idea, and I can't just jump onto the next thing because I have 100 ideas. So I need to be much more intentional with my time and set time for myself to say, okay, I know I want to develop this idea that I've started workshopping. Today I'm going to develop kind of 2 or 3 ways that I could see it coming about, or do a few mock-ups or sketches, so that way I have that next step in place. Because as creatives, and I know you do the same, it's
Yeah.
easy for us to live in our heads and see, well, I see how it's going to look, but until you actually do it and make it, it's a whole different thing. And
Yeah.
sometimes it turns out differently once you execute it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that comment. And it's good to hear, as a visual artist, you follow some of the same principles that we do as knowledge workers. We call that creative confidence. It's kind of the foundation of the design thinking process. Your ability to put pen to paper, your ability to kind of organize artifacts very quickly that spark inspiration. It's what holds most people back from creating in the first place, is that first step. And so it's really exciting to hear that that's maybe what you focus on as part of your creative process. Now, um, as a creative, I'm curious, what is the best way that people can bring you into a project?
That's a really great question. Um, and not one you get frequently, as someone from X asking me. It's just what I want, what'll it cost and everything. So I'm trying to think about
Totally.
how to answer this. The best actually clients I've had, whether it's an art client or advertising client, are clients that are as uninvolved as possible, because they get what
Mm.
your vision is. And that doesn't mean that I only like that work. I like work also where I have a lot of restrictions, because it's a creative challenge to make something that's not appealing or quote unquote sexy on paper look cool. Like, I like that work just as much. there's more of a internal burn that happens with that, but I enjoy the burn as
Yeah.
opposed to I only had 1 or 2 clients that said, "Just do whatever you wanna do, and it'll be great," and kind of letting me really go with my
Mm.
instinct. So, it's always great to have that level of confidence put in you because someone understands how you think and your vision, and they trust you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's almost like, when you go in and you work with a body worker or an acupuncturist or like someone who moves energy. It's like you can go in and say like, my leg hurts or my ankle hurts, or you can go in and just allow them to
Right.
kind of work their practitionership. And I think
Completely.
that trust is such an easy component to lose, especially like if you're commissioning somebody to design something or build something, you have something in your mind. And it sounds like maybe you work best when you start with a blank canvas and you're given kind of that autonomy. And I think as creators, we all feel that way.
Sure.
And I think one of the best things that we can do is to very quickly establish trust. And that's maybe not by a laundry list of our resume of where we've succeeded, but more so bringing them into our creative process, helping them understand kind of that messy beginning, if you will, the need to kind of explore and play, and not necessarily fixate on an outcome. So
Sure.
again, some really good parallels between you as a visual artist and maybe the work that we do in creating experiences. It all has to start with a blank canvas, and we as artists and creators have to have the creative confidence to push it forward.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, but it's a bit of both. I think it's the confidence, but with the humility as well. Sorry, it's
Yeah.
sirens in the background. I'm in New York now, so
No, understandable. So let's move into a little bit more on kind of technology and the role that technology is playing in creation, creativity, the creative process. Um, it was maybe 2 years ago. You and I were connected through the NFT space. You and I were both kind of exploring building NFT projects, and I thought yours was particularly unique. And I know that we both had maybe different intentions than the masses, which ultimately kind of took the NFT market down, if you will. There was just a lot of like land grabbing and greed, et cetera. Um, but I think it's important that we're able to share some of the insights and the lessons learned. As two people that were passionate about this technology, maybe still are, had the creative confidence to put a project forward with some real intention behind it. And after our experience in that space, and I'm curious to hear from you, what are some of the things that you've learned? What were some of the insights that you drew from your NFT project?
definitely. So I always say, and your greatest strengths are your greatest weaknesses. And for me, I'm not someone who considers myself incredibly adept technologically. I'm probably like a B by millennial standards, you
Yeah,
know?
right.
So, but the reason I only got into the NFT world was I just could not get excited about it for so long because I didn't understand it. I really just didn't understand it. I didn't understand how it worked. I didn't understand what it was. I kept feeling like every time I read about it, I'd be like, okay, but aren't there 10 more pages after this? Like
Yeah.
I don't understand. Like I just for whatever reason, my brain could not see why this was interesting and cool. And then once I wrapped my head around the kind of the randomization and like tokenization
Mhm.
around it up front and this idea of kind of like aligning to the gumball balls, like a lottery of everyone paying the same thing and not knowing who's going to get something that's
Mm.
quote unquote more valuable versus not.
Yeah.
That gamification really appealed to me, and that's
Oh,
what
that's
then made
cool.
me say, "Oh, I wanted to do one," not because everyone's doing one. I was actually very late to the game compared to everyone else, but I wanted only then could I get excited around the idea, saying, "Okay, what can I make that can only be viewed or appreciated on a screen," because I'm also very I'm very medium agnostic in the sense of if something exists as a painting, it doesn't exist as a screen print.
Yeah.
I don't do digital prints. I only do screen prints. The NFT was my first digital thing, and I didn't want it to
Mm.
be anything at all that you could create in real life. It had to be this moving image. So
Mhm.
So I definitely learned a lot more about the space just from doing that, that project. But I also learned that I'm better when I can talk to people face to face about the work. And it's sometimes, for me, it's really hard to, not that I'm always selling something when someone's, looking at the work, but it's, you can't be there in real life to get excited about something and talk about it if you don't know if someone's looking at it.
Yeah.
So, and this is like another reason why I hadn't touched my website in 10 years, and I just redesigned it this summer, and we spent 5 months doing it. And the process was grueling, because at the end of the day, like, you don't have any control over how that conversation is going to go. Not that you have control, control's an illusion, but it's just like, I learned that for me, I really like the process of connecting with people and learning something about them. Like, that's the gift people give me of their time and conversation when they come to talk to me about my work. So,
Well, I can say, we all love your website. In fact, I was just sending the link to a few folks on our team. I just think it flows super easy. Aesthetically, it's gorgeous, and it clearly defines kind of who you are and who you're not. I also enjoyed learning a little bit more about your NFT project, because it looked like a real kind of digital reflection of a lot of the work that you had done in the analog space. It was a collection of these. It was a collection of these plans.
I didn't touch on that. So abstract, if you're listening right now, it's like, well so I wanted to do something that was, again, within the childhood realm. And I was thinking about having a box of crayons at a restaurant as a kid. Now kids have their iPads or whatever, but and sometimes as an adult, you want a box of crayons at a restaurant because you just, whatever, the conversation's boring, it's going too long, whatever. You just, you want that mode of expression. And I was thinking about how coloring is the first way children are often introduced to the world of creativity, through crayons, through Crayola crayons. And then I was thinking, well, if adults had crayons and they were R-rated crayons, what would that look like if they were naughty crayons? So we came out with this kind of plethora of these digitized crayons that spin on a screen if you purchase one of the NFTs, but you wouldn't know which crayon, aka how rare or not rare something was going to be until it was minted. So you buy a token, not knowing if you get, I'm not going to say, one of the more G-rated ones versus one of the more R-rated ones. And that kind of excited me. That really excited me. And I liked the idea of having these crayons that, again, just look like a normal Crayola crayon. And then once you get closer and look at the screen and read the title and kind of see the small imagery on it, that's a little more R-rated, you kind of get the humor behind it. So I love
and it becomes a bit of a novelty and a bit of a collectible. People have fun with it. I think, one of the things that we learned most from the Create the Space NFT project, which again we launched almost 2 years ago, and again, like, a little bit late to the game. It took me forever to understand like what this technology was going to do, and I love what you said about I designed and launched a project because I had no idea what this technology was, and I knew I had to get closer to it. And again, that's just such a tip of the hat to this creative confidence that we have to have. Like, if you were going to wait and see if, NFT technology had staying power and if it was going to be largely successful, you would be way late to the game, and you would not have flexed or exercised those muscles in the way that you had to, and just kind of figuring it out. And I think one of the things that we learned that was just such a positive byproduct of launching our NFT project was that even in the digital space, it's the human, traditional, analog components to the experience that made even the NFT experience. So, for us, we tied a face-to-face experience to the NFT, where you had to be at one of our highly curated dinners in order to
which was brilliant
to gain the NFT. There was a small cohort of like 8 to 10 folks. So you were connected not just by the asset, but also by the experience that you were a part of. And I think it goes the same for yours. You're playing on tried and true components to design and art, which is, nostalgia, collectability, a little bit of gamification. And I think, NFT technology maybe came here to remind us what's so important about creativity. And that is like just the tried and true elements. So that maybe is a good bridge to, as you look up and out and you see even more technological advancements, particularly AI and auto-generated art, and these phones now that, like, with a touch of a button, you can make swaps of blemishes on your face, or even swap your face if you want to. I think for some it can be extremely overwhelming, and I'm curious, as a creator and an artist yourself, like, how are you receiving this technology? How are you learning about it? And are you embracing it?
No, it's a great question, and I definitely second that it's overwhelming. But at the same time, it's kind of the best analogy, or wherever my head went here visually for some reason, is if you have to run, a 25K marathon. Well, yeah, you can stand back and look at it as long as you want, but you're going to have to run it at some point. So you got to decide what shoes you're going to buy. Like, how
Yeah.
are you a more paced runner, or do you want to run, the first half of it at half the rate versus someone else? So for me, I kind of like looking at things saying, okay, this is happening, whether I like it or
Yeah.
not. So how do I make it work for me and try not to get swept up in the coulds, shoulds, woulds? Because I think we live, and I don't want to say what anyone should or could do, because there are there's so many solutions now, which is one of the beauties of it, that not everything works for every business. And then sometimes that's frustrating too, because I need something very different for my internal work than what you might need. And it might
Right.
exist for, someone with a business of your scale, but not so much for me. And I may have to workshop it a little bit. So
Mhm.
when, of course, when you have time to get whatever you need, whether it's a CRM tool, or a copywriting tool, etc., it's great. But when you need it in the moment, of course, it feels frustrating, because you feel like, your hands are tied behind your back, that it might be there. But to kind of loop back to how I learn about things and how I find out, it's a lot of Google. It's a lot of, I think as I've gotten older, I used to just jump into things from a place of anxiety in my 20s when I was first working. And now I just, not that I don't do that anymore, I still do that on occasion, but I really sit back now, and before committing to something, say, is this the best way we can do this? Is this the best platform? Or if I were to design, which I find is helpful, if I were to design a platform that worked for me, what would it look like? That way I'm
Mm,
going in with my criteria and
love
not
that.
getting kind of like seduced or eluded
Yeah.
by, we were just looking at an image asset system, for example. And I said, I want the possibility to have tags to rename the files so that we can search for the files by color. That was very specific. And my part-time assistant said, oh, that's a really good idea. And that really narrowed down the criteria. It's not that the other
Mm,
things wouldn't have worked, but you have to know what works best for you. You can't, I think, wait till other people tell you. But simultaneously, as a creative, it's hugely distracting, because you see these amazing things where you think about possibilities and you think, okay, but should I be using this or that? So it's a bit of both. It's that creative confidence you alluded to, but also
yeah.
I don't know, confidence and foolishness simultaneously.
Yeah.
It's kind of like you have to have a bit of both. So
Yeah. It's interesting. One of the things that we're maybe experiencing is um, the fact that a lot of this technology, as it comes into our world as consultants and coaches and knowledge workers, we're realizing that it's creating a little bit of a premium on, again, some of the kind of tried and true aspects of our practitionership that cannot be replicated through a chatbot or AI. And I almost liken it to, as we started to come out of lockdown and COVID, and folks were starting to organize more face to face. There became this, and still is, this huge premium on these great old school face to face experiences. Whether it's dinner out with your friends or family, or in our world, whether it's an immersive workshop across a couple hundred people in a hotel
sure.
conference room, those experiences, those touch points, the analog, are at a higher premium today than they ever were. And my hypothesis is the same thing is going to happen with this technology, where it's going to be those creators, those knowledge workers that are able to leverage technology to support, augment, supplement what has always been true about art, or what has always been true about leadership development. and not necessarily those who very quickly can leverage technology to replace. And I think that's something that is already starting to kind of like prove itself out. As organizations have more access to this technology, they're actually coming to us even more so now to say, hey, we've had people that have been behind screens for 3 years. How
Right.
can we make a really, really meaningful experience that is far greater than any pipe and drape kind of rows of chairs conference that they've ever been to? And we don't want to use Chat GPT. We don't want to use generative AI. Like, we want
Right.
people face to face because we're doing it now once a year instead of 6 times a year.
Right. Right.
And I'm wondering if the same, kind of thing is going to happen in the artistic world. Is it going to start to flush out, some of the weaker artists or those artists that are relying too much on technology? And is it going to give those that truly, have kind of the tried and true ability more of the spotlight?
It's a really great question, and one that I don't have. Well, actually, I'm not sure if anyone has the answer to, because
Yeah.
unlike a lot of businesses where you can measure, success or whatever, art's completely subjective. And who's to say that an
Mm.
artist who's making things out of technology, who's to say their work is better or worse than mine? I just know what I believe in. And for me,
Mm.
I find more value in something that's created that can't be duplicated by a machine. But someone might look at it side by side and say, I don't know, I like the thing that was done by the computer
Yeah.
more. So
Yeah.
these are really hard questions, and I'm happy to hear that you feel there's a premium placed on in-person events, because for whatever reason, and granted, maybe a lot of my audience is much younger and not as business focused as your clientele. I feel like mine is just like, okay, well, unless it can be done on my screen or phone, like, I don't want to
Mhm.
go. Not everyone, but I'm
Yeah.
more in that camp of, I'm worried about people just not wanting to take the time to do something in person, or to want to
Sure.
take the easy way out. Even working with administrative assistants over the summer, I had so many interns say, well, is this in person or virtual? And I said, you're working for an artist. What do you think? How are we going to do that virtually? It's just like,
Right.
that was a non-starter for me. I just feel like,
Right.
well, that's insane. You just miss like so much of, at least for this, it's one thing if you're coding, it's another thing if you're painting and prepping and mood
Mhm.
boarding things, and or dropping off artwork, even something not that
Yeah.
exciting. But it's just you lose so much of the energy and interaction. So I'm happy to hear that you actually feel events are becoming, are having more of a premium again, because I've found it very hard, at least with a lot of people, to kind of get the same attendance to things that
Yeah.
I used to get. I mean, that might just be me too, and not a global thing, but
Yeah.
these are
Yeah.
questions you ask as a creative. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I so appreciate the insights. I think what I'm hearing is, as practitioners ourselves, like, we've got to stick to what we feel is true, and where we can find the most creative confidence, and the market will speak. And again, our
yeah,
market's a little bit different than yours, but at the end of the day, our audience, the consumers of our content and our artwork and our experiences, they will give us the feedback that they need. And then we can decide kind of how we bring technology in. But so appreciate the insights. Do you have time for a quick lightning round? We like to do a lightning round at the end. These
oh
are just
yes, I love a
random.
good lightning round. Yeah,
Okay, good. Random questions. They're going to come quick,
I
and
love it.
there's no wrong answer. So, Kristin, tell us, what are you reading, watching, or listening to right now that you're super geeking out about?
I'm reading a book called Stolen Focus. I don't know who the author's name is, which is very fitting and
That's okay.
Freudian. But it's all about, again, how we're in this economy of disattention, and how more than ever now we can't sit still for 5 minutes because of the way
Mm.
technology has changed around us. Watching nothing good. I started like a horror show I didn't like last night, so I don't want to rat out anyone. So yeah, nothing. I mean, yeah, just like a lot of like reruns of Friends and Frasier when I'm kind of making them in the background.
Is this is old school Frasier? Because doesn't he have a new? There's like a
Yeah,
new
I
Frasier
haven't
that's
watched the
coming
new one. I don't
out.
want to. I'm very no. Like if a show's come out already, I don't want to watch the new one. I
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
to remember it how it is. So yeah, I haven't watched the new one. I don't know.
I must have been a really old soul, because when I was a child and Frasier was like prime time, I was like, I couldn't get enough of it. I loved Frasier. And all
It's
my friends were like, why are you watching that? Like, that's an old
right,
man's show.
right. But
Um,
listen, it's each to his own. So
it's
glad you're
so
here.
good. Yeah, it's
It's
so
so
good.
good. It's so
Um,
good.
as a creative, I love asking this to other creatives. When you are kind of fixated on a project or you're super deep in work and you take a moment to just kind of look up and out and maybe gaze out the window, um, what typically comes to mind for you?
It's like a feeling of happiness and
Mm,
euphoria, and I should, do it more, but you can only do things instinctively when you do them, where I just kind of have a moment to think to myself, "Wow, I'm so lucky to be able to do this right
mm.
now, to be able to do this for work just within my life, to have the space to do this." I really just try to come to it with a place of gratitude.
I love that. What is the earliest memory or the earliest memory of like the earliest expression of your creativity?
We had a fish tank growing up, classic New York
You went
family.
right in on this.
Classic New York family, like, no dogs, no cats, whatever, because, like, we
Yeah.
couldn't take care of anything. Um, and I got to have it in my room, and I had this, I got to pick kind of, and it wasn't a huge fish tank. It was maybe, a foot long by a foot high or something. But I remember going to the fish store and getting to pick kind of the faux, like, coral centerpiece that would be
Yes.
in the middle of it. And I,
Yeah.
like, was taking forever, like, weighing the pros and cons of these things. And then I forgot about this until I went to my mom's home the other day where I grew up. And I saw that I'd done a little watercolor or painting of it as a child. I guess for
Oh my
whatever
God.
reason, this like coral construction thing in the middle of this totally fake fish tank was just like so fascinating to me. And I just, yeah, that's my earliest memory of what I
I
made.
love that. Fishbowl design. Very
Yeah.
early on. I love that. Who needs interior design? You got fishbowl design.
Oh, God, I don't know. I'm
That's
a fish
that's
people.
incredible.
I don't know.
That's incredible. I as a child, I used to go to like rummage sales and like garage sales, and I would pick up
Oh,
like old speakers and old like picture
mhm.
frames and stuff and bring them back to my room and just like totally redo the room.
Oh, I
Um,
love
and
that. Do you still have
my
them?
parents hated it, right? Because I was just
Of
bringing
course,
junk
you would
in and
bring
like
stuff. Yeah.
repurposing it.
Why do we
But
need
it
it?
was so great to just like reimagine your space. I love that.
Oh, it's the
Um,
best.
okay, last question. And I want you to think about something that you admire about yourself and finish this sentence. If the world were a lot more like Kristin, it would be what?
Less hesitant.
Ooh, I like that. I like
There was
that.
probably a better word for that, but that's just what came to
Mm,
mind. Every time, and I say that because every time in my life where something has gone really well, it's because I didn't overthink what I was doing and I said, "Well, just go talk to that person. What's the worst that can happen?"
yeah.
Or just say this, "What's the worst that can happen?" It's always been around when I've kind of just listened to my gut and acted on it. You can't do it all the time, but um, I think if people, you kind of disarm people in a way that's comforting when you do that, because at the end of the day,
Mm,
we're all just people. I mean, I even had, this is a great example. I had a woman come up to me in the street yesterday and say hi and look at me as if she knew me. And I kind of stood there looking at her and said, "Hello, I'm a little confused." And she said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I thought you were someone I knew." And I said, "Oh my gosh, no, thank you for telling me, because I was just thinking I've lost my mind." And we both had a good laugh about it. Walked for, 10 minutes down a block, but it's just,
yeah.
again, it's just like I didn't, I wasn't rude to her, and I completely understood where she was coming from. Just seeing other people as humans and talking to them in the way you talk to yourself, which is easier said than done. But
Yeah.
I think it's so important.
I love that. I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining today. I mean, I know I learned a lot just in terms of the way that you approach your craft, the creative process. A lot on creative confidence. I think that also maps to what is so admirable about you. Just your ability to kind of like move forward, put pen to paper, say
Oh,
hello in many cases,
thank you.
and
Yeah.
so we just we so appreciate you, the work that you do, and we want to welcome you to the Navigating Now community. Thank you so much for
Thank
being a
you.
part of it,
Oh,
and
thanks for having me. It's
hopefully we
been
can have
so
you
great.
back on again sometime soon.
Would love that. Thank you again. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristin. All right. We want to round out this episode 163 of the Thoughtium Virtual Roundtable Series. We go live every Thursday afternoon at 3:00 with leaders like Kristin and others. I just love the breadth of conversation that we're having across, our discipline in business and other disciplines like art and technology. It's so important for us to, stretch our minds every once in a while and kind of stand at the doorstep of our role or our organization, look up and out, and bring insights in from those who are doing things maybe a little bit differently, or maybe not, a little bit more similarly. And that's what makes us all connected. So we want to thank everybody for joining, those folks who stopped by on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, all of the channels. You can see this episode, previous episodes, and look forward to what's next at thoughttium.com/live. Again, we will be here every Thursday at 3:00. Thank you all, and